Just getting my pan nice and hot. Hello, welcome to the show. Today I'm going to make for you, in fact I'm making it for my guests tonight, one of my favourite one-pot wonders. This is beef bourguignon, and it really is very, very simple to make. It makes use of very, very cheap cuts of meat, so it's great for those of you perhaps who don't want to spend a fortune but want to feed a lot of people. It does take a while to make, not in the actual preparation time so much, but certainly in the cooking time. So unless you've got a good 2.5 hours to spare, or you own a pressure cooker, probably not a great choice. But if you've got the time, it really is quite lovely, and it's fantastic day after day. So if you make enough of it, you can freeze it and have it for a bit later on. Now the ingredients that I've got here that I'm going to be using, I'm using a blade bone steak. Now you can use a chuck steak, you can use a gravy beef. Any of the tougher cuts of meat will work really, really well with this dish. In fact, the tougher they are, the better it is, because the long, slow cooking process is what's going to tenderise them up. Plus, the fatty sinew and the connective tissue that's in the meat is going to ooze out through all of it and really give it a lovely flavour and a lovely tenderisation. We're also going to be using some celery and some carrot in today. I've got some pancetta. Now, you can use bacon if you want, but I particularly like pancetta, so that's why I've gone down that route. And you'll notice that I've actually done these quite chunky, and the flavour I think is a lot better when you go down that track as well. We're using garlic. Now you can either use a bouquet garni or you can use a bay leaf and some fresh thyme, which is what I've chosen to do today. I have also made it with bouquet garni, so the choice is yours, and you can either make that fresh, so out of the garden, tie the pieces together, or you can just use the little bags that look like tea bags, and they work quite well too. You can either use stock, you can use chicken, beef or veal stock, or you can just use water if you want with the red wine that's going to go in it. And we're using about 3/4 of a bottle of red wine for about 1 kilogram of meat. Now, the wine that I would choose, obviously it's a beef bourguignon, so Burgundy is the wine of choice. But if you can't get hold of that, or you don't have any of that, then any good full-bodied red wine will work really, really well. So I'm actually just using a Merlot today. And a little bit of plain flour. We're going to use that to coat our meat so we get it nice and brown, and also that will help thicken the gravy once it's cooking in the oven. Some button mushrooms, which I have just quartered. All I've done is clean them with a brush, and I've quartered them. And you want them nice and chunky because this is cooking for a long period of time. Even if it's in a pressure cooker and it's a short period of time, you still want it quite chunky. And we're using some French shallots, which literally all I've done is peeled. I'm not going to chop those, we're actually going to have those whole. Now, I've got my pan heating. You need your pan to be fairly hot. And the reason for that is because we want to sear that meat fairly quickly and give it a lovely caramelisation, and then work our way through the rest of the ingredients. So the first thing I'm going to do is just move my ingredients out of the road for a moment so they'll be ready for me to grab and go into my cooktop. And I'm going to just coat my meat here a little bit. Now I'm going to use some gloves, and I'm going to do that mostly for my convenience as opposed to a hygiene reason, and that is because I'm the only one eating this with my guests, but it'll make it easier for me to be able to prep it all fairly quickly. Now, and also take them off afterwards, I'm just going to add to this some salt and some freshly ground black pepper, and just season it ever so slightly and then pour it into the bowl. Now you can do this one of two ways. You can either do what I'm about to do here, which is literally just use my hands to coat the meat with the flour, the seasoned flour, or you can pop it all into a big freezer bag and toss it, turn it upside down and toss it. That's another great way as well. Look, it's purely a preference, a personal preference about how you go about doing that. So just coat it as much as you possibly can, making sure that you get a good amount of flour and seasoning on each piece of meat that you've got in that bowl. You'll notice also that I've made my beef quite chunky, and I do this on purpose. One, because it just looks a lot better when you serve it up, which I think is all as important, especially when you're working with a one-pot wonder. They don't always plate up very, very nicely, so it's nice to do something with them that will make them look a little bit better. And I find making my meat really chunky is a good way to do it. The other bit is that it holds together better. You don't have all these tiny little bits of pieces, and it's actually just nicer to eat that way. All right, so I've got my pan nice and hot. What I'm going to do now is add a little bit of vegetable oil. Now I just use a rice bran oil. This is my oil of choice for cooking most things, other than when I use an olive oil for Italian cooking, or if I'm using it in dressings and things like that, or if I'm making an Italian specific dish. But I find this is great. It's quite a neutral oil, and it's got a very, very high smoke point, so it's not likely to burn on me. It does help to take the top off it though. So just put a reasonable amount of that into your pan. Now I'm using a non-stick pan, and again, a lot of people will say to you when you're doing browning of meat, don't use a non-stick. I personally like non-stick. I find they work incredibly well. If you've got a good quality one, then that will be fine. So I'm just going to turn that back up again because I turned it down just ever so slightly so we didn't burn. I've got it on full pelt right now, so that is really important. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to add my meat into there straight away because we want to brown that first. Okay, now once that meat is browned up, we want to remove it from the pan because we're going to use this pan to cook the rest of the ingredients. Then we're going to add them all back again. Okay, so let's just set that aside for the moment to rest. What we're going to do now is add a little bit more oil to our pan. And we're going to add our carrots and our celery. And turn my heat back up again, and I'm going to add now my pancetta. Now what's going to happen with this as well is it's going to brown, which we want it to do, but the other thing it's going to do is the fat that's in the pancetta is going to melt. It's going to give us a little bit more greasing in that pan and add flavour to our dish. Alright, going to add my mushrooms now. And the garlic and the herbs. When you're working with bay leaf, just break it in half so that the flavour comes out of the leaf itself. Now for the onions. And again, they're whole, so they're nice and large. We're not going to overly cook them just here, we're just going to brown them off a little bit. Alright, I'm going to add my meat now back into that pan. And what we're going to do now is we're going to add the red wine first. Now the wine won't actually cover the ingredients completely, so this is where you're going to add either your water or your stock to top it up. And what we want to do is make sure that we're literally just covering the meat and the ingredients in there. Alright, so what we're going to do now is divide up our ingredients, and I'm going to put some into a casserole dish. And what's left over, that doesn't fit in here, I will cook on the stove. So that's about as much as I'm going to put in my casserole. And I'll bring it over to my bench so you can have a look at the quantity that I've got in there. As you can see, pretty much liquid is covering what I've got. That is enough. That way it's guaranteed not to boil over in the oven, which I don't want to happen. And the rest is going to stay on the stove. And this one goes into the oven. The recipe's back on the website, of course. There are links below here. If you're watching this from the site, there are links below to the recipes and a whole host of other skills and techniques that are applicable to this particular recipe. And of course, if you become a registered member of the site, which will cost you nothing, you will get an email on a regular basis to let you know what we've added to the site continually. I'd very much like to connect with you on social media too if you're into social media. So please come to the Facebook page, Black Book Cooking, or even to my personal page, Victoria Hanson, on Facebook, and friend me up there. I would love to connect with you and chat with you about food and cooking, and of course on Twitter if you're into Twitter as well. Thanks again for your company.